Chapter 5 of Mystery of the Sea. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Crystal Trevor. The Mystery of the Sea. I do not remember what woke me. I had a vague idea that it was a voice, but whether outside the house or within myself, I know not. It was 11 o'clock by my watch when I left the Kilmarnock Arms and took my way across the sand hills, heading for the Hawk Law which stood out boldly in the brilliant moonlight. I followed the devious sheep track amongst the dunes covered with wet, bent grass, every now and again stumbling amongst the rabbit burrows, which in those days honeycombed the sand hills of Cruden Bay. At last I came to the Hawklaw, and, climbing the steep terraced edge near the sea, sat on the top to breathe myself after the climb. The scene was one of exquisite beauty. Its natural loveliness was enhanced by the softness of the full yellow moonlight, which seemed to flood the heavens and the earth alike. To the southeast, the bleak promontory of Whinnyfold stood out stark and black as velvet, and the rocks of the Skares were like black dots in the quivering sea of gold. I arose and went on my way. The tide was far out, and as I stumbled along the rude path above the waste of boulders, I had a feeling that I should be late. I hurried on, crossed the little rill which usually only trickled down beside the fisher's zigzag path at the back of Whinnyfold, but which now was a rushing stream. Again the noise of falling water, the voice of the Lammas floods, and took the cart track which ran hard by the cliff down to the point which looked direct upon the Skares. When I reached the very edge of the cliff, where the long seagrass and the deep clover felt underfoot like a luxurious carpet, I was not surprised to see Gormala seated, looking out seawards. The broad track of moon lay right across the outmost rock of the Skares, and falling across some of the jagged rocks, which seemed like fangs rising from the deep water, as the heave of the waveless sea fell back, and the white water streamed down, came up to where we stood, and seemed to bathe both the seer woman and myself in light. There was no current anywhere, but only the silent rise and fall of the water in the everlasting movement of the sea. When she heard me behind her, Gormala turned round, and the patient calmness of her face disappeared. She rose quickly, and as she did so she pointed to a small boat which, sailing up from the south, was now drawing opposite to us, and appeared to be making a course as close to shore as possible, just clearing the outer bulwark of the Skares. "Look," she said, "Lachlan MacLeod comes by his lanes. The rocks are around him, and his doom is at hand." There did not appear any danger in such a course. The wind was gentle, the tide was at the still moment between ebb and flow, and the smoothness of the water beyond the rock seemed to mark its great depth. All at once the boat seemed to stand still. We were too far off to hear a sound even on such a still night. The mast bent forward and broke short off. The sails hung limp in the water, with the peak of the lug sail sticking up in a great triangle, like the fin of a mammoth shark. A few seconds after, a dark speck moved on the water, which became agitated around it. It was evident that a swimmer was making for land. I would have gone to help him had it been of use, but it was not. The outer rock was half a mile away. Indeed, though I knew it was no use, I was yet about to swim to meet him when Gormala's voice behind me arrested me. "Do you not see the gin ye meet him amid young rocks? You can, when the tide begins to race, be no help to any. If he can win, though, ye may help him if ye may bide here." The advice was good, and I stayed my feet. The swimmer evidently knew the danger, for he hurried frantically to win some point of safety before the tide should turn. But the rocks of the Skares are deadly steep. They rise from the water sheer everywhere, and to climb them from the sea is a hopeless task. Once and again the swimmer tried to find a chink or cranny where he could climb, but each time he tried to raise himself, he fell back into the water. Moreover, I could see that he was wounded, for his left hand hung idle. He seemed to realize the hopelessness of the task, and turning, made desperately for the part where he stood. He was now within the most dangerous spot in the whole region of the Skares. The water is of great depth everywhere, and the needle points of rocks rise almost to the very surface. It is only when the waves are rough at low water that they can be seen at all, when the dip of the waves leaves them bare. But from the surface, in calm weather, they cannot be seen, as the swirl of the tide around them is invisible. Here, too, the tide, rounding the point and having the current broken by the masses of the great rock, rolls with inconceivable rapidity. I had too often watched from the headland where my house was to be said of the tide not to know the danger. I shouted as loudly as I could, but for some reason he did not hear me. The moments ere the tide should turn seemed like ages, and yet it was with a sudden shock that I heard the gurgle of moving water, followed by the lap, 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 getting quicker each second. Somewhere inland the clock struck 12. The tide had turned and was beginning to flow. In a few seconds the swimmer felt its effects, though he did not seem to notice them. Then he was swept towards the north. All at once there was a muffled cry which seemed to reach slowly to where we stood, and the swimmer rolled over for an instant. It was only too apparent what had happened. He had struck his arm against one of the sunken rocks and injured it. Then he commenced a mad struggle for life, swimming without either arm in that deadly current which grew faster and faster every moment. He was breathless, and now and again his head dipped, but he kept on valiantly. At last, in one of these dips, borne by the momentum of his own strength and the force of the current, he struck his head against another of the sunken rocks. For an instant he raised it, and I could see it run red in the glare of the moonlight. Then he sank. From the height where I stood I could see the bloody roll over and over in the fierce current which made for the outmost point to the northeast of the promontory. I ran over as fast as I could, Gormala following. When I came to the rock, which here shelved, I plunged in, and after a few strokes met by chance the body as it rolled upward. With a desperate effort I brought it to land. The struggle to lift the body from the water and to bear it up the rock exhausted me, so that when I reached the top of the cliff, I had to pause for a few seconds to breathe hard. Since the poor fellow's struggle for life had begun, I had never for an instant given the prophecy a thought. But now, all at once, as I looked past the figure, lying limp before me with the poor arms twisted unnaturally and the head turned, away past the moonlit sea and the great golden orb whose track was wrinkled over the racing tide, the full force of it burst upon me, and I felt a sort of spiritual transformation. The air seemed full of fluttering wings, sea and land alike teemed with life that I had not hitherto dreamed of. I fell in a sort of spiritual trance, but the open eyes were upon me. I feared the man was dead, but Briton-like I would not accept the conviction without effort. So I raised the body to my shoulders, determined to make with what speed I could for Whinnyfold, where fire and willing hands could aid in restoration. As I laid the limp body across my shoulders, holding the two hands in my right hand to steady the burden, whilst with the left I drew some of the clothing tight, I caught Gormala's eye. She had not helped me in any possible way, though more than once in distress I had called to her. So now I said angrily, "Get away, woman! You should be ashamed of yourself, never to help at such a time." And I took my way unaided. I did not heed at the time her answer, spoken with a certain measure of deprecation, though it afterwards